All right, everybody, welcome to Module 6. It's hard to believe that we are already on Module 6. We are almost done with the semester. Only, I think, one more lecture and then the final. So we are plugging right along here. So what we're going to do today is do a bit of a review, talk about contingencies of reinforcement, some discrete trial training information, some naturalistic teaching procedures. Then we'll finish with shaping as well as some task analysis and chaining. So that's what our agenda is for this evening. And what we're going to do, like we always do, is start with our ASRs. The 7 dimensions of ABA include applied, behavioral, analytic, technological, conceptually systematic, affective, and A, functional, B, psychological, C, generality, or D, hypothetical. The correct answer here is C, generality. ASR number 2. One way to remember the 7 dimensions is A, B, or C. And the correct answer here is C. ASR number 3. The dimension of behavioral includes A, observable and measurable responses, B, precise definitions that describes behavior, not an outcome, C, document that the participant behavior has changed, D, all of the above. And the correct answer here is D. ASR number 4. Applied refers to A, social significance, B, doing things, C, observable and measurable, or D, repeatability. The correct answer here is A, social significance. ASR number 5. Technological refers to A, social significance, B, doing things, C, observable and measurable, or D, repeatability. And the correct answer here is D, repeatability. ASR number 6. Conceptually systematic refers to A, interventions that come from behavior analysis, B, enables consumers to derive similar procedures, C, assist in integrating a system and not a collection of tips, or D, all of the above. And the correct answer here is D, all of the above. ASR number 7. Analytic refers to A, social significance, B, precision, C, functional relation, or D, hypothesis. And the correct answer here is C, functional relation. ASR number 8. Generality refers to A, durable, B, changes that last over time, C, appear in multiple environments, or D, spread to other behaviors. Or E, all of the above. ASR number 9. Effective refers to A. Did this work? B. Produces practical results. C. Must reach clinical or social significance. D. Noticeable change. Or E. All of the above. Okay, the correct answer here is E. All of the above. ASR number 10. Refrigerator mothers cause autism. True or false? And the correct answer here, of course, is false. ASR number 11. School district staff can diagnose a student with ASD. True or false? And the correct answer here is false. ASR number 12. Learners who receive 25 to 40 hours of one-on-one treatment are receiving what type of treatment? A. Focused, B. Comprehensive, C. Paraprofessional, or D. Discrete? And the correct answer here is B. Comprehensive. ASR number 13. The general philosophy of ABA treatment include what? A. Everyone with autism is capable of learning. B. Right to effective treatment. C. The learner is always right. D. Self-determination. E. Least intrusive treatment. Or F. All of the above. And the correct answer here is F. All of the above. ASR number 14. Target behavior should be selected for the primary benefit of others to simply maintain the status quo or because they pique the interest of someone like us in a position to change the behavior. True or false? And the correct answer here is false. ASR number 15. A good operational definition should be able to pass the what? Eyeball test, dead man's test, stranger test, or standardized test. And the correct answer here is C, stranger test. The three fundamental properties or dimensional quantities are A, repeatability, temporal extent, and temporal locus, B, IRT latency and duration, or C, count, frequency, and acceleration. And the correct answer here is A. ASR number 17. Social negative reinforcement is also known as A, attention, B, tangible, or C, escape. And the correct answer here is C, escape. Automatic positive reinforcement depends on the action of others. True or false? And the correct answer here is false. ASR number 19. Social positive reinforcement is also known as A, attention, B, tangible, C, escape. And the correct answer here is A, attention. ASR number 20. A discriminative stimulus signals the store is open for what? A, punishment, B, reinforcement, or C, extinction. And the correct answer here is B, reinforcement. ASR number 21. FBA interventions can consist of at least blank strategic approaches. A6, B3, C2, D9. And the correct answer here is B3. ASR number 22. There are blank main functions of behavior tested for using an FA. A2, B7, C3, D4. And the correct answer here is D4. This graph suggests the function of behavior is A, attention, or I'm sorry, A, alone, B, attention, C, escape. And the correct answer here is C, escape. This graph suggests the function of behavior is A, alone, B, attention, or C, escape. And the correct answer here is B, attention. This graph suggests the function of behavior is A, alone, B, attention, or C, escape. And the correct answer here is A, alone. All right, that is our review. Here is your first lecture verification. How do you do it? Simple. Whenever he starts crying, just give him his teddy. Dude, how do you do it? Easy, bro. Just start crying. Mom gives me a teddy every time. Give you a moment to copy down this whole thing. How do you do it? Simple. Whenever he starts crying, just give him his teddy. Dude, how do you do it? Easy, bro. Just start crying. Mom gives me a teddy every time. Okay, so now let's move on to contingencies of reinforcement. So we want to talk about some schedules of reinforcement as well. And what schedules of reinforcement is the ratio of or interval in which a stimulus that is either removed or added increases behavior. So every behavior has a schedule of reinforcement that maintains it, and there are two types. We have interval schedules and ratio schedules. Interval schedules are based on a unit of time, and ratio schedules are based on a number of responses. So that is the key to understanding schedules of reinforcement. Intervals equal time, ratio equals number of responses. Now you can look at both of those types, interval and ratio, and you can break those down even further. And you can break those down into fixed and variable. So you have fixed, which is a set number of behavior that acts as a reinforcer. And variable is an average number or unit of time that accesses the reinforcer. And we're going to look at these in some more detail. So when we put it together, you have the type plus the dimension, which gives you the schedule. So an example of that would be fixed ratio, and we note that as FR. And you can have VR, which is variable ratio, FI, which is fixed interval, and VI, which is variable interval. And here's that. So fixed interval equals FI, fixed ratio equals FR, variable interval equals VI, and variable ratio equals 4. And those are the basic schedule types. So we'll look at each of these individually, and then we'll do some practice similar to how we do our ASRs with the schedules of reinforcement. So looking at a fixed interval, this is the same amount of time that elapses when reinforcer is delivered. So it's fixed, it's the same amount of time. And we report that unit of time in schedules. So for example, an FI 2-minute schedule or an FI 5-minute or second schedule. It can be a little bit tricky. Some people prefer to put a space between the I and the number because you could theoretically read this mistakenly if you're going too quickly as FI 12 minutes. So some people put a space between the letter and the number, which would be fine. So what this means here when we're looking at this example, FI2, every 2 minutes if the individual is engaged in the behavior, we provide reinforcement. FI5, for 5 seconds they engage in the behavior, we provide reinforcement. Or every 5 seconds, yeah. So we deliver reinforcement every 3 seconds. What would that look like? How would we note that? What would be the abbreviation? So you can do FI3 or FI3 seconds because sometimes we have seconds, sometimes we have minutes. But FI3 would be okay. Reinforcement is delivered every 10 seconds. And this will be an FI10 or FI10 seconds. Reinforcement delivered every 10 minutes. And this would be an FI10 or FI10 minutes. How about reinforcement being delivered every 2 minutes? So this would be an FI2 or an FI2 minutes. How about reinforcement delivered every hour? Now there will be 2 ways that you could note this, FI 1 hour or FI 60 minutes. How about reinforcement delivered every 3 hours? I would go with FI 3 hour for this one. Reinforcement delivered every 3 minutes. And you would note this as FI3 or FI3 minutes. How about reinforcement delivered every 1 minute? Now you could do FI 1 minute or FI 60 seconds for reinforcement that is delivered every 1 minute. Now we have this thing, pardon me, that we need to understand called the scallop effect. That only occurs in fixed schedules of reinforcement, so fixed interval or fixed ratio. And this was discovered in experimental analysis of behavior labs. And it looks like this. And this graph comes from the Cooper text, the second edition. But we have this thing that is described, the way that the action in this graph, the trend, is just described as a scallop effect. You can see it kind of swoops to each point. Each of these lines is where reinforcement has been delivered, the straight lines. So what you can see with fixed schedules is the learner learns when reinforcement is going to be delivered and what they essentially need to do to earn reinforcement. So whether it's time or number of responses, an individual will get their reinforcement and then they'll have this little pause right after reinforcement. Then all of a sudden you see it, the individual starts to want to gain reinforcement. So they'll start engaging in those behaviors at a higher rate. And then they'll get their reinforcement and it'll slow down again and have another little pause. And it'll increase. And then reinforcement is delivered and so on and so forth. And you would see this in either fixed interval or fixed ratio. Because you could say, oh, if we're doing time, so time's passing, and then all of a sudden, oh, I have, I don't know, let's say it's an FI 1 minute, and I have 20 seconds left in this interval to do all of these things. So someone hurries up and they do everything to get to their goal or what their requirement for reinforcement. Or we have a number of responses, and let's say someone has to complete, I don't know, 8 word problems, math problems, let's say, to gain reinforcement. And they don't do any math problems, and all of a sudden, hey, I could really use social attention as a reinforcer. So I'm going to hurry up and bang out 8 problems. And you see that kind of increase. You can do, it could be either fixed interval or fixed ratio. And during that fixed interval, that little pause is called a post-reinforcement pause. And it typically occurs, right? Because we've gained our reinforcement for doing the things and doing the behaviors, and we are sated, right? We have received what we need, and we're no longer having to engage in behaviors to get those things. But eventually we're going to want those things again, and that satiation starts to fade, and we start to want to look at doing some behaviors to gain reinforcement. An overall fixed interval has a slow to moderate effect on behavior. Now, fixed ratio has a similar effect. And when we're talking about fixed ratios, the same amount of reinforcement is delivered based on a number of responses. And we report this in responses similar to how we did fixed interval. And it would look just like this: FR3, FR4, or FR12. So what we're going to do is practice what that looks like. We're going to go through the same exact pattern that we just did, and then look at this a little bit differently, or in more depth. Apologies. So reinforcement delivered every 3 responses. What would that be noted as? So yeah, the correct answer here would be an FR3. What would reinforcement delivered every 5 responses look like? And the correct answer here is FR5. Reinforcement delivered every 7 responses. and that would be an FR7. Reinforcement delivered every response. And that is an FR1 or CRF, which is continuous reinforcement. So every response is sometimes called CRF. This continuous reinforcement helps with skill acquisition, builds behaviors, and can be reported as either CRF or FR1. And the reason we want, pardon me, we would want to use a CRF is if we're working on a new behavior and we need to really be delivering a ton of reinforcement to really help that behavior be inserted into someone's repertoire. And we are really trying to strengthen that behavior, so we're providing reinforcement like hot and heavy at the jump in order to get that person, our client, student, whoever it might be, to really engage in that behavior often and start really associating with me doing this thing and me earning this reinforcer. Now we can fade that schedule into something more stringent, if you will. And this is that stepwise pattern. You still would call it a scallop effect, but it's more of a stepwise shape. And again, you can see the lines here signify where reinforcement is delivered, and where it plateaus, that's that post reinforcement pause again. So if you think back to fixed interval and fixed ratio, you both call them, you'd call them kind of both a scallop effect, even though this has more of a stepwise fashion. I guess I need to go back and look at the Cooper text and see if they call this a stepwise fashion. From what I recall, they called them both scallop, but regardless, it's important to understand that with fixed interval and fixed ratio, we have what we call a post reinforcement pause, and then all of a sudden that satiation starts to wear off, and then people engage in behaviors in order to gain that reinforcement. So it's very similar, even though it kind of presents itself in a graphic form a bit differently. So again, we talked about that. We just talked about that post reinforcement pause. Again, it's good for building new responses, and fixed schedules allow for more fine-grained manipulation than interval. So here is lecture verification number 2. How many basic schedule types exist? We're going to have a couple of different lecture verifications tonight. So how many basic schedules exist? All right, moving on. So that was fixed interval, fixed ratio. We're now going to look at variable. So we're going to touch on variable interval. So we are now looking at the passage or variable. We're looking at average. Okay, so a variable interval is an average number. It's not fixed. So it's an average unit of time reported as either median or mean. You typically would want to use median when you have some extreme outliers. An example of this would be if we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 seconds, we would set a variable interval at VI 3 seconds. So what we're going to do now is practice noting the variable interval schedules. So if we have 4, 3, 7, 5, and 1 minute, what would our schedule be? So this would be a VI4. So if we're using mean and we tally up, if we add all the time up, it adds up to 20. Yep, if I'm thinking correctly. And then 20 divided by 5 is 4. Now, if you were reporting this as median, which is also acceptable, you would be at a VI5. So, but typically what we want to do if we don't have very extreme outliers, right now we don't, in this example, they're not large outliers. We don't have 1, 3, 4, 5, and 20. If we saw that, we'd probably go to median. But when they're pretty close together, we'd go with mean, and that would be a VI4. So let's try that again. Let's try another one. So we have 4, 2, 6, 2, and 1 minute. How would we, 1 minute, how would we represent this? And for this example, we will be using a VI3, VI3 minute. Let's keep practicing here. So we have 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. What would we do here? And for this example, we would have a variable interval 15 or VI 15. Now here, if we look at how this is graphed, right? When we're using variable interval, we do not see that either scalloped or stepwise appearance. We see a steady increasing trend. And as you can see, these lines along that trend line are where reinforcement is delivered. And because it's variable and it's occurring at different times, essentially what it does is it keeps the client or student or participant, whoever it is that we're working with, essentially they don't exactly know when reinforcement is going to be delivered. So they're going to continue to engage in those behaviors, kind of waiting, trying to feel their way through to get reinforcement. It's not predictable or as predictable. So again, you're unlikely to see that post reinforcement pause that we see with the fixed schedules, and keeps a moderate rate of responding depending on the schedule. So if we look back at the graph, it's not a super quick increasing trend. It's not accelerating at a high rate, but it is, I think any of us would take this data, right? We're seeing improvement across time, which is what we want to see, but it's not skyrocketing, if you will, immediately. And then we also have variable ratio, which is an average number of responses are needed to obtain reinforcement. And we also report these as median or mean of responses required. So for example, if we have 1 response, 3 response, 4 response, 4 response, that'd be our 3. So let's practice this. We have 5, 6, and 4 responses here. Oops. So here we have a VR5. Let's practice a bit more. We have 6, 8, 5, and 6 responses. So when you do this math, it turns out to be 6.25. So for this, I would round down to a VR6. Now, let's say if with a different set of numbers, it turned out to be 6.55 or 6.7, then I would round up. So, and also you would want to use your professional judgment with the client that you're working with and the tasks that you're working with. But I would just go with the principles of how you round to set that standard, if that makes sense. But for this one, I would put it as a VR6. Okay, let's keep going with our practice. So we have 2, 4, and 6 responses. And here we have a VR4. And let's keep going with our practice. We have 10, 12, 15, 13, and 10 responses. And don't be ashamed if you have your calculator out, because I will be truthful, mine's sitting out too. So what we would see here is a variable ratio 12. So we also need to talk about intermittent responding. So intermittent scheduled reinforcement, it's tied to that variable ratio and it strengthens behavior very well. Looking at variable ratio and looking if we think through or across all of the graphs that we have looked at when it comes to these schedules of reinforcement, variable ratio has the steepest trend, right? It is accelerating at a high rate. And that's because, again, you're essentially keeping the learner on their toes. Like they have to continue to engage in these responses in order to gain reinforcement. So you'll see these responses just really happening at a high rate in order to gain behavior. So what we want to do is now kind of talk about the matching law and talk about reinforcement and that it must be worth the effort. So all of us do things to gain things or get away from things, right? But if we are thinking about modifying other individuals' behaviors, for example, reducing a maladaptive or challenging behavior, right? We want that to go away and we want to put in place a potential replacement behavior. If that replacement behavior costs them a lot in the form of effort to gain reinforcement, but the maladaptive behavior is easy for them to do, what do you think they're going to do? Right? They're going to engage in the maladaptive behavior. So we have to make sure that the behaviors that we want individuals to do to gain reinforcement uh, are not that much more challenging than the actual maladaptive behavior. We could be doing this by manipulating some features or all features, the amount and the novelty and duration of what they need to be doing, or the behavior can be easy to do too. So it's just about thinking about what we're asking our clients to do. And if the effort's too great, they're not going to do that, and they're going to fall back on the thing that they know. And the great thing about what we do, and I think, I don't know if it's focused on enough or if it's just glossed over or what, but the big thing is we don't want people to be on interventions all the time, right? Like that's the point. Like that's an insult to teaching. I didn't mean it that way. When I was a special education teacher, I used to say, if I could put myself out of a job at this school, then I've done my job and I'll go find a job somewhere else. If I could kind of push all my students into an inclusive classroom and didn't need me, and I was able to get them all off IEPs, and I've done my job, cool. And I think we need to think that way a bit about working with individuals with disabilities. Now, for some with ASD, particularly when we're talking about this course. Now, for some students or clients that we're working with, they're going to need support for a very long time or throughout the duration of their life, depending on severity. But what we can and should aspire to is helping them learn a skill, insert that into their repertoire, and then move on and then work on other skills. And the only way we can do those things is if we're thinning reinforcement for some skills as we're introducing new skills. So what that means is we gradually increase the responding requirement for them to gain reinforcement or meet their reinforcer. And we can provide directions or rules regarding reinforcement. So if you think about if we start out with, let's say, a fixed ratio of 2 responses. Well, after a while, we want to make that a little bit we want to thin that more. And then we go up to an FR4 and then an FR6. Now the individuals are having to engage in more responses in order to gain reinforcement. But what we can encounter, and this happens, and I think it happens frequently, is that we fade or thin too quickly, right? So that is called ratio strain. So if we are really pushing that ratio further and further apart and we do it too quickly, then all of a sudden that learner is not contacting reinforcement as frequently, and it happened really quickly. And then what we see is this lag, if you will, in their responding. And what you could see is aggression, avoidance, or unpredictable responding. And if you start to see that in the data, then we need to examine what's happening, look at our session notes, reflect on the session, and think about, did I thin this too quickly? And if we did, that's okay. Back it down, get that responding happening more consistently, and then begin to thin it. Okay, so that's the schedules of reinforcement. We want to talk now a bit about discrete trial training. So we have set this whole semester, and we've talked about the kind of basic principles and went deeper into some of the basic principles of behavior, and really kind of even went further than the basic principles of behavior. And I've talked about it most of the off and on throughout the semester, is that without having that understanding, and we started talking about interventions a little bit last week, and now this week we're really on interventions, but without knowing these fundamental foundational principles, it doesn't matter if we're doing discrete trial. It doesn't matter if we're doing behavior contracts. It doesn't matter, right, if we're not doing things correctly. So that was the setup to this whole class. And now we're going to jump in and talk about discrete trial a little bit. Now, a lot of you may be familiar with discrete trial or doing discrete trial. I've done some discrete trial stuff. I can't teach you how to do discrete trial training in this one module. Like, it ain't gonna happen. What I can do is introduce it to you. Hopefully when you're getting your supervision hours or you're out working in the field, that's when you're getting this hands-on. The only way to really learn how to do this and do this well is to be doing it. When I learned how to do discrete trial training, I learned it in my classes clearly, but when I was doing it, when I was actually implementing DTT, that is when I learned how to do it. And it can be very nuanced. It can be for me anyways, I should say, it was very daunting at first. But the more you're into it, the more you're doing it, the more you build that automaticity. You get your behavior with DTT becomes pretty fluent. So DTT is among the most well-researched and well-known treatment and education procedures for teaching skills to learners with ASD. Discrete trial is a teaching method in which learning trials are presented in quick succession with a clear beginning and clear end to each trial, hence discrete. There are 3 parts to a discrete trial. 1, the instruction. And now these are generalities. Different folks have different ways that they talk about discrete trial and different methods of discrete trial. So this is more of a general framework of what things look like. Clearly, depending on the approach that you're using, it can look a little bit different. But the 3 general parts are: the instruction is delivered by the technician or the BCBA or the BCABA, the RBT. The learner's response occurs, and the consequences delivered by the technician. And remember, consequences don't always mean bad. It could be a reinforcer. Skills commonly taught using this method include matching, basic listener responding, so identifying labels or objects or following simple instructions, motor and vocal imitation, language skills involving action, features, function, cause and effect categories, academic skills, including numbers, shapes, and colors. The list really can go on. Like, you can do a lot of stuff with discrete trial. The rationale for this is that learners with ASD often require a large number of learning opportunities to master skills, and DTT was developed to ensure that the highest number of learning opportunities possible. And we think about working with learners with ASD, providing a lot of, and really learners of all ability, right? Providing a ton of opportunities to respond and work within a skill helps those skills become learned, particularly if we're using errorless correction procedures, if we are providing good instruction, if we're doing a good job on our end, the students are engaging in these trials with success, and a lot of success. The benefits of DTT are that it produces rapid learning. There are many learning opportunities that can be presented quickly because learning is teacher directed, and it helps individuals with ASD to learn structured work expectations and is straightforward to train staff to implement. So once you walk into a clinic and you're working for someone and they have their DTT procedures, they will teach you how to do that. If you become a BCABA and you are running a clinic or you own a clinic, you will be putting in staff training to explain and support your people to implement DTT. There are some drawbacks, though. They can teach rote responding if done poorly. And by rote, we just mean essentially strict memorization of facts with no really meaningful learning if we're not doing it properly. Learned skills may not generalize to less structured natural environments. So what that essentially is saying is like, okay, I know how the learner has now learned that when we're sitting at our table session doing DTT, this is when I do this behavior. And if we have not programmed for generalization, if we have not planned for generalization, then we might not see the learner then engaging in those behaviors in different settings outside of the table session. And ultimately, that's what we want. We want the learner to take the skills that we've taught them and then go do them somewhere else and take that learning and generalize it to different settings. And it does not build in reinforcement for learner spontaneity per se, because it is a very structured program. The general characteristics kind of going forward with, pardon me, with DTT. The interaction between behavior technician and learner is broken down to 3 discrete units. The trial consists of the instruction delivered by the technician and learner's response, and again, the consequence being delivered immediately after the response. What you could run into if you haven't already, I know I certainly have, and I was actually just talking with some folks earlier today. We were talking about math stuff. I was talking to a math researcher today, and we were talking about practice, and which you can relate to discrete trial because it's a lot of practicing skills and learning skills. And we were talking about drill and kill. And what is meant by this is that DTT hurts a person's motivation to learn because it is repetitive and boring. However, nowhere within a discrete trial teaching protocol are behavior techs, RBTs, BCABAs or PCBAs instructed to be boring and use an artificial tone of voice and deliver repetitive and ineffective reinforcers, or use non-meaningful teaching materials. Essentially, don't suck. Like, I know that's very blunt, but like, you don't have to be robotic. Like, you don't. I think we get a bad rap as behavior analysts, BCABAs, RBTs, in that we are cold and we are only driven by data, which we are, but we're not cold. We're allowed to laugh. We're allowed to be kind. We're allowed to have fun with our job. If we don't, we're going to burn out quickly. So yeah, we have to follow the structure of the lesson and the procedures and do all of these things with fidelity. Yeah, clearly we need to do that to increase the probability of positive outcomes, but you don't have to be cold. Like, you can have fun and you can smile and you can give high fives and like you can do that stuff depending on, clearly on reinforcement history and what's motivating people to do stuff, because we don't want to mess with the principles of reinforcement. But yeah, we can make it fun. Like, we can enjoy our jobs and we can have our learners enjoy learning, because if learners enjoy learning, they're going to want to learn some more. So that's, I could get on a soapbox on that for a long time. Like, we don't need to be cold. Like, you need to love what you're doing. If you don't love what you're doing, I suggest finding a different field. And that goes for any field. Like, I don't care if you're bagging groceries. If you don't love that, like, I suggest doing something else. If you are a professor and you don't love working with people that are learning to go do stuff, then I suggest quitting and doing something else. If you don't like being a fire person, I suggest doing something else. Like, you need to love what you're doing, because what we do impacts what others do and what our learners do. And it's very important that we understand that. And another part of this, the whole drill and kill thing gets me, if you haven't noticed, is nobody blinks an eye when, a concert cellist is practicing to get better. Nobody. Like, that is expected and appreciated and often lauded, right? No one bats an eye when, a figure skater is putting hours in on the ice. No one bats an eye when a musician is locked away in a room practicing for hours on end to become better at whatever instrument that it is that they play, or athletes. Like, practice is held up like, oh, look at how hard they work. And what they're doing is they're just repeating the same, essentially the same skills over and over and over and over and over and over again in order to become amazing at it. Practice is looked at it highly in those areas, but when it comes to working with kids with disabilities or without disabilities, practice, practice, holy hell, it's terrible. You're not allowed to practice. We have to make fun. We have to make learning fun. Again, make learning fun. But we have to let people discover learning on their own through this inquiry-based approach. Like, damn that. Like, no. Like, kids need to practice. Learners need to practice purposefully. And it can be fun still, but it has to, practice has to be purposeful. It has to be directed. Feedback must be delivered. But nobody blinks an eye when other people practice, right? And then what you'll hear is that, oh, well, practice kills creativity. Again, to hell with that. Like, you don't have these people that are writing amazing pieces of music, right? Out of nowhere. Like, they learned the basic fundamentals of their craft, and not until they perfected that were they able to create these amazing works of art. So practice, in my opinion, of these basic skills are the precursor to creativity and all this other stuff and creating new ideas and new things. So again, sorry, I went a little bit on a tangent. I will shut up now about that. But just understand that purposeful practice is important. Purposeful practice needs to be led by the teacher or technician or BCBA, engaged in by the learner, with success, with feedback being provided and reinforcement being delivered. So, and seen. I will stop talking about that. But you can use some of my diatribes if you need to, if you run into drill kill people. So implementing DTT, so gaining the learner's attention is something we need to do. That can look at several different ways. For me, it was fairly simple. With one of the learners that I worked with, we'd go from the natural environment training area, and be like, okay, time for table sessions, or we just say time for table. We'd go over to the table, and it would just be like, okay, time to learn. And he would kind of set up a little bit in his seat and put his hands on the table and would bring his attention towards me, and it was time to go. So, and it wasn't that simple at first, right? But after that was a learned thing, the learner attention thing, right? The protocol, then that's all we needed to do to get started. Deliver the instruction, state the instruction in a clear and upbeat manner. Again, not robotically. There's no need to use artificial tone or voice. Like, be you. Like, that is something I think that has served me well in my career as a teacher, as a BCBA, as a professor. Like, I'm me. I talk like me. I act like me. If you don't like me, too bad, but you probably will. So again, just be you. Don't be robotic. Pair a prompt with the instruction if it is to be a prompted trial. So there is a section on prompting in the book. If you're doing probe trials to see what people learn or know, rather, what skills they know, then you probably are not going to be prompting. Wait up to 3 seconds for the learner to respond, so provide some wait time. I hope you notice when I do the ASRs, I provide wait time. I wait for people to respond. I wait for people to think. Depending on the question in the ASR, I'll give longer wait time. I'll give shorter wait time. Like today, if you had to add a bunch of numbers together and do some mathematics, even if you're using a calculator, I provided a little bit more wait time. So you use that professional judgment when doing these things, but wait up to 3 seconds for the learner to respond, particular in DTT when we're having this these very rapid learning trials. If the learner responds correctly, reinforce immediately and enthusiastically. Deliver whatever reinforcer that we have identified through whatever preference assessment and reinforcer assessment to the individual. If the learner responds incorrectly and does not respond, implement a correction procedure immediately. Record data quickly and then repeat, essentially gain the learner's attention again if you need to, and then move on to the next trial. When we're talking about error correction is critical. It's super important. So when the learner makes an incorrect response during direct trial training, you will generally implement a correction procedure. For example, you might repeat the instruction while also giving an immediate full prompt to ensure the learner makes a correct response when the next learning opportunity occurs. There is also errorless learning, where if the student is struggling, you kind of help them get through it, and they go through you essentially say the prompt again, then deliver the answer, and then have them do it. I do highly suggest looking into errorless learning, but we're not going to get into that. But what I do want to do is play a video here by Dr. Carbone from the Carbone Clinic. He is big into DTT, and as are several other folks, but Dr. Carbone has been doing this stuff for a very long time, and a lot of different, globally, actually. So I'm going to play this video from Dr. Carbone that talks about discrete trial instruction.
Discrete trial instruction is an important method for teaching children with autism. There are many studies documenting the benefits of this method. This method generally includes a teacher sitting with a student, with a learner, with a child with autism. The teacher has materials and information that they would like to provide to the student. The student usually sits across a table. The teacher presents the instructional material, and when children are unable to or have not yet learned to respond to the material, the teacher will prompt the response and help the child to learn the skill. It's been found to be a very important method for teaching children with autism and overcoming some of the symptoms and learning difficulties of children with autism. There have been a number of ways of conducting discrete trial instruction sessions. What I'd like to do now is show you a video and talk to you about a method of discrete trial instruction that we have found to be the most effective, and embedded in this video, as well as the methodology, I will discuss with you why we're teaching in the manner in which we're teaching this individual child. So let's now take a look at this video.
Good, there's a token for you, Sylvia. What's this one called? Toothpaste. Touch your hand. Good, what's this one called?
Bow.
Oh, good, Sylvia. 2 tokens for you. What's this one?
Radio.
A radio because it's blues.
Cruise.
Blues.
Cruise.
There you go. What's this one called?
Bud.
That's right, it's a slide feature, it says, eh?
Bud.
And what room is this? Kitchen.
Kitchen.
What room is it?
Kitchen.
Kitchen. Good. One token for you, Sylvia. Say puzzle.
Puzzle.
And what's this one called?
Spoon.
Spoon. What room is this?
Kitchen.
Kitchen. Good, Sylvia. 2 tokens. What animal here?
Nick.
Say marker.
Marker.
What's this one called?
Pakaka.
A popsicle. Good. There's another token. What this?
Let's now take a look at a video of discrete trial instruction where the methodology includes a number of strategies that have been demonstrated to be effective with children with autism to reduce problem behavior during high demand situations. This is a video of a learner with autism, a 6-year-old girl by the name of Sylvia, and her teacher Leanne. This was videotaped in the Carbone Clinic in New York. Sylvia is a learner with autism who would not benefit from everyday life experiences as it relates to acquiring language and other cognitive skills. So discrete trial instruction is a method that is used to directly teach the type of skills that typical children might learn. As you can see, Leanne has a set of materials in front of her, and she's systematically presenting these materials, and Sylvia is expected to respond. She's also using a token board, as you can see, and she's ticking off the tokens which act as rewards for Sylvia, which can then be exchanged for an activity after she's completed all of her work and has achieved and attained about 40 or so tokens. Leanne has some materials in front of her. Some of those are new targets, skills she's working on, and a lot of it is, in fact, mastered skills. So let's now describe what it is Leanne is doing. The purpose of what Leanne's procedures are is to basically reduce problem behavior, which is a big problem during discrete trial instruction. When you ask children with autism to sit and attend to tasks, they frequently engage in disruptive escape and avoidance behavior. As a result of that, Leanne is teaching in a very specific sort of way based upon a set of methods that have been shown to be effective to reduce problem behavior. One of the first things you probably notice is the pace of instruction. You notice how quickly Leanne is presenting instructional demands to Sylvia. But notice, Sylvia is not frustrated in any way, not bothered by it, not distressed by it, but just continues to respond. We have found that children actually prefer to be presented materials in a fast-paced sort of way. In fact, Carol Roxborough and I published a paper a couple of years ago, actually in 2012, in the journal Behavior Modification, a psychological journal, peer-reviewed scientific journal in the United States, that basically showed that you actually achieved less problem behavior the faster you presented demands. So presenting demands at about 1 second with a 1 second interval, or what's called a intertrial interval, seems to be most effective for many children. Of course, the pace should be adjusted to the individual child. In addition, Leanne is only presenting a few let me back up, a few target skills to many, many mastered skills. And the reason for that is that the interspersal of easy demands along with only a few difficult demands seems to reduce problem behavior pretty effectively. It's called interspersal training. In addition, she's mixing all of the skills together. In other words, one time she teaches a label, then she'll teach motor imitation, then she'll teach a listener response. This is referred to as mixing and varying. It has also been shown to reduce problem behavior. In addition, whenever she presents a target, an unknown skill, she will immediately prompt a response. That's called errorless teaching, making it impossible for Sylvia to be incorrect, or greatly reducing the probability that she'll be incorrect. In fact, reducing learner errors also reduces problem behavior. So these are some of the methods you're seeing presented here during discrete trial instruction. It may not look exactly like what you might see other people presenting in a very slow and deliberate way, but the methods here are specifically designed to reduce problem behavior and make it less likely that we have problem behavior and more cooperation. And here at the end is Sylvia receiving her backup reinforcer, and now she will enjoy that for a few minutes and then go right back to teaching.
So you can see in the Carbone video, the pace of that lesson, that discrete trial lesson or session, is incredibly fast. It is super quick. It's great for fluency. It's great for building that confidence in that student. It's great for getting multiple trials and multiple skills in there. Um, I think some people could look at this and say, oh, that's very drill and kill, which I understand, but you have to understand with drill and kill, it's basically here, just do math facts and bang these out. I'm not going to provide reinforcement. I'm not going to use a token board. I'm not going to do this, that, or other thing. It's not very purposeful. Now, when they're making this video to show what they're doing at the Carbone Clinic clearly and how discrete trial works, you can be sure that the young girl in this video, Sylvia, didn't start out at that pace, right? When you are, when a learner is first sitting down in a table session, sometimes just getting that learner to the table is a lot of work before you're even going through the skills and stuff like that. Just acclimating an individual to gain their attention and how that process looks and how that works can be tough, right? If you're thinking about an individual, in this case, we'll just say with ASD, but any individual we're using discrete trial with, learning is accompanied by challenging behaviors, and most things are accompanied by challenging behaviors. And just getting an individual to sit in a chair to do a discrete trial can be a process to get that individual to get there. So, and then also think when we talk about the different treatment options, is it focused, is it comprehensive? This is more of a comprehensive where they're getting a ton of exposure to this process. Clearly Sylvia had been doing this for a very long time, and the instructor, Leanne, has been doing it very well because she's on point with it. But yeah, so there were a lot of things going on there. And they're showing how, and I have seen students in person going that quickly, but I have worked with kids going that quickly, but that same kid that I was doing it with, not quite as good as Leanne, because she's killing it there, but pretty quick. But we definitely didn't start out that way. We started out with like 2 seconds butt on seat and then back out of seat, right? Like it's a process like that. And just like perfect data that we show in class to like, hey, this is what this looks like. Like data never looked like that, right? Data are always variable. Like things are never perfect. So don't let that freak you out and be like, I'm never going to do that. Like it's okay. But what it does is that it shows what this looks like. So now what we're going to look at after watching the Carbone video is is naturalistic teaching procedures. So the natural in ABA teaching can also look natural in its delivery and can be embedded with play or everyday routines. I am not going to pretend for you all I struggle in the net in natural environment training. It's not something that I've ever really been overly comfortable doing, and I don't know why. It was never my thing, because I just felt it was very contrived. I didn't feel natural doing it. But what I can tell you is, even though I did warm up to it and I got better at it, but what I did see was quality outcomes from naturalistic teaching. There's a variety of naturalistic teaching procedures that have been developed, and it has been shown to be effective for learners with ASD. It's also known by several different names. You hear me refer to it as the natural environment training. There's pivotal response training, Miley training, and incidental teaching. It is never, I just never felt 100% comfortable with it. And I don't know why, but it is what it is. Like not everyone's comfortable doing all the things. It's a very child-directed approach to learning. The use of reinforcers that are related to the teaching interactions, motivation embedded within the teaching context, interspersal of mastered skills, and less of a focus on maximizing the greatest possible number of learning opportunities, although we do pay attention to that. How we implement this is we prepare the environment by having several different options for the learner to essentially play and interact with. We engage the learner in those activities in the arranged environment. The learner initiates what they're doing. If the learner's initiation is already sufficient for reinforcement, reinforce that response. If the learner's initiation is not sufficient for reinforcement, prompt the response. If the learner responds to your prompt correctly, reinforce it and then fade that prompt over time. And ensure that the environment is arranged for another learning opportunity. So you have to have these multiple options essentially for the learner in the environment. Kind of thinking back to some of this net activities that I've done, and we had like a bin of Legos, then we had a Mr. Potato Head, and then we had like cars. It was what a young kiddo I was working with. We had like a puzzle, like we had all these different options in this contrived kind of arranged environment that, you know, he may have started playing with Mr. Potato Head, but after a minute or two, he was over that. We can move on to something else in the net. If you don't have the environment set up for that, then your session is essentially shut because you only have one activity for the individual to engage in. And I found this video as I was kind of prepping for tonight, and I thought, yeah, this is actually an awesome thing to include because A, it's Dr. Tarbox and one of the authors of our book that we're using in this class, but he compares DTT and the natural environment training. And I just thought that I would include this because, you know, it's straight from the horse's mouth, essentially. Like, this is the dude, one of the people that wrote the book that we are using. So let's have a look and listen to see what Dr. Tarbox has to say in how he makes this comparison.
Our special guest right now is Dr. Jonathan Tarbox. He is the head of research and development here at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, and you are also the director of the Autism Research Group. We've been talking with Dr. Tarbox about DTT in the last segment, but we mentioned that there are other ways in which we want to work with our children. So talk to us a little bit about NET.
Sure.
And maybe, you know, tell us when is it a good idea to use one and when is it a good idea to use the other?
Right. So we talked about how earlier forms of earlier forms of ABA for children with autism focused heavily on DTT. And that's great, and that produced really great results, and it worked really, really well. But then there's quite a bit of research now, actually starting in 1968, but even more so in the last 30 years, on more naturalistic or play-based approaches to behavioral intervention. So it's still using the principles of applied behavior analysis, and it's still creating learning opportunities and using prompting and immediate feedback with, you know, positive reinforcement. It's all the same basic principles and procedures. The difference is it's embedded into more sort of natural environment learning opportunities. Okay, so for example. Plus there's lots of different procedures, sort of brands, that all fall within what we would consider NET. So for example, you might have heard of pivotal response training, or PRT. Milieu training is one that comes out of education. Natural language paradigm, the MAND model, incidental teaching, modified incidental teaching. All these are different approaches that focus on building building behavioral sort of teaching principles and procedures into more natural environment interactions. So I'm not saying that there's no difference between all those different ones, but the similarities between those many procedures are enough such that it makes sense to talk about all of them as NET, or natural environment training.
Right.
So here's some of the features that pretty much all natural environment training shares. One, the learning opportunity is directed by the student, not the teacher. So in discrete trial training, the whole point is the teacher controls the rate of learning opportunity. So the teacher delivers the instruction, that's the learning opportunity, okay? And the whole point is make lots of them happen as fast as possible so you get the most learning in the shortest amount of time possible. In natural environment training, it's different. The student actually makes some kind of initiation that starts the learning opportunity, okay? So let me give you an example of what I mean. In discrete trial training, if we wanted to teach a child, let's say a color, like black, we're teaching the color black, okay? You might hold up something that's black and say, what color is it? So that's a clear instruction, right? And the student has the opportunity to respond, and you reinforce correct response. If we were doing that same thing, but in natural environment training, we would set up a situation for the where the student would want to initiate to something black on their own, and so they'd initiate the learning opportunity. So we might take their favorite teddy bear that happens to be black and put it up on the shelf out of reach, and so the student looks up at it and goes like this. That's the student initiating the learning opportunity, especially if they look at you, right? So they reach up, they can't get the bear, it's too high up, and then they look at you, boom, that's a learning opportunity. And so there, they have an opportunity to respond, just like discrete trial training, so they could say the word black for the bear, or you could prompt it, so black or buh. The student says black, great, you reinforce, okay? But the opportunity to learn is controlled by the student, it's not controlled by the teacher. Now there's some pluses and minuses to that, okay? A major plus is already the student is motivated because they're initiating the opportunity, right? So you're not forcing them to do something they don't want to do, which is really not what we do in DTT anyways, but still, you're sure that the motivation is there. However, there's a major disadvantage of that too, and that is you kind of have to wait around for the kid to want to learn, right? And we already know that that doesn't work. That doesn't produce enough learning opportunities, right? If waiting for children with autism to initiate learning produce enough learning opportunities, I wouldn't have a job, So there's major advantages and disadvantages. Here's another feature, though, of NET is, pardon me, instruction occurs as much as possible in the natural environment rather than a more contrived environment. So with discrete trial training, it's very clear that some kind of instruction and tutoring is going on. In fact, the teacher or the tutor will say, okay, let's get to work, right? Just like any instructor or tutor would. With natural environment training, if it's done right, the student doesn't even know that they're being trained, okay? So they just hang out in their living room and there's something they want and they reach up for it, okay? All right, so it takes place in the natural environment as opposed to a more clearly instructional environment or contrived environment. And there's pluses and minuses to that as well. If you have a natural environment that's conveniently set up so that you can work on all the skills you need to work on, great. Natural environment's better for generalization. But the fact of the matter is you don't always have that, right? So, let's say we wanted to work on, objects that have various features, that concept. Well, do we have enough of those objects that just happen to be hanging around in our house, a large enough variety and, et cetera. So it's just common sense that instruction requires some level of contrivance, to make sure that you have enough materials and everything available.
Absolutely.
Here's a third difference between NET and DTT, and this also has its own pluses and minuses, and that is the reinforcer for correct responding is supposed to be the natural consequence of that behavior as much as possible. So again, let's go back to the colors example. If I hold up a black object in DTT and I say, what color is it? And you say black, and I say, all right, great job, and I give you whatever reinforcer was planned for this discrete trial training session, and it's not related to this black object in any way. I don't give you the black thing, okay? Whereas in the teddy bear example, if the kid's reaching for his favorite teddy bear, you prompt him to say black, he says black, you give him the teddy bear. That's what he wanted. So it's the natural consequence. Same thing with making a sandwich. If you're doing NET training on, let's say object labels in the context of making a sandwich, and the kid, points to a piece of bread because he needs the bread for the sandwich, and you prompt him to say bread, and he says bread, you give him the bread. That's the natural consequence of the kid saying bread, right?
Absolutely.
So the reinforcement in NET is much more natural. It's less contrived.
Okay. My question, because I always have a question.
Great.
So let's go back to the example of black. So the DTT way you're teaching and you're holding a black and saying whatever. Now in NET, if I say, what do you want to play today? And the child says, I want to play trains, and we go and play trains, and I know I want to work on...
That's definitely a discrete trial.
If I say, what do you want to play? That's still DTT.
Definitely a discrete trial because it's initiated by the teacher, not the student. The student didn't ask themselves what they want to play. You initiated it, okay? and it's not necessarily in the context of natural environment. I mean, let's say you were already playing with the kid, and you're done with one activity, and you said, all right, what should we play next?
Right.
You know, in the context of play, then that would be very much gray area. That's probably sort of half and half, you know.
Interesting.
And the fact of the matter is, real life teaching and learning usually isn't 100% NET or 100% DTT. Real life is usually somewhere in between, or
but we don't have a
borrowing
name
aspects
for that.
from both.
We have real life teaching.
Right. Well, the thing is, though, the important thing to note is the whole choice between NET and DTT really isn't a choice. It's a false dichotomy. There's no good quality ABA programs that only do one or only do the other. Because neither one of them is good enough on their own. DTT provides lots of learning opportunities, a much higher rate of learning opportunities than NET, but NET is really great for generalization. It helps the kid generalize the skills to the natural environment because you're already in the natural environment, so they learn them in the natural environment.
So I think the takeaway is that if we want to be successful, and I define success as creating as much progress as possible for an individual child, then we have to be using DTT and NET.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't think there's any credible top quality behavior analytic program anymore that would say you can have maximum success for a young child with autism in an intensive ABA program and only do one or the other. That's ridiculous. And people who say that anymore either don't understand how those two procedures fit within the overall umbrella of ABA, or they've just been kind of maybe brainwashed by whatever camp they belong to. It's just not reasonable anymore to say that you just do one or the other. It's silly.
But I think parents are going to be relieved to hear that, because I think we look at it objectively that way automatically.
Yeah, well, and that's just sort of a simplistic and childish way of looking at things, like politics. Like, it's either this or that, there's no compromise. I mean, that's just not how learning works. You know, you really want to use a combination of both.
ABA, having DTT and NET, and that's what's going to create real progress.
That's right.
Wonderful.
So yeah, I mean, I think when I came across Dr. Tarbox's video, that video is that he really puts it out there in plain, understandable language about these things, and that if we don't do both, right? If we don't do NTT and NET, then we are harming generalization, right? or we're not really working on generalization, and the net really helps with that. So I really think that was a solid video. So hopefully that was informative for you. I think this is actually lecture verification number 3, so I apologize. Like I said, we're going to have multiple lecture verifications tonight. This is our third lecture verification, actually. So the lecture verification is what? Generalization, bro. I'll give you a moment to copy that down. All right, let's keep on keeping on. So we're going to talk about, we're going to end today on, there's a few more slides, don't get too excited. But we are going to end at least today's lecture on focusing on task analysis, shaping, and chaining. And this is something I really dig. I like talking about it, like teaching about it. And not too long ago, this video was making the rounds in the social media sphere. I don't know how many folks have seen this video, but I'm gonna play it because I've watched it multiple times and it cracks me up. If you haven't had the chance to watch this video, hopefully you enjoy it. If you have seen this video, I hope you enjoy watching it again. So let's have a look at the making a sandwich challenge.
You're not making any sense. He's already ruined it on purpose.
You know what? I'm hungry. I could really go for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Do you guys think you can write down some instructions and teach me how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
Yeah. I'm done.
Step 1. Get 2 pieces of bread out. Got 'em. Get a butter knife and get some PB. Take 1 piece of bread, spread it around with the butter knife.
No, Dad, with the peanut butter.
I'm just doing what it says. It says take 1 piece of bread, spread it around with the butter knife.
Hold on.
Get some jelly, rub it on the other half of the bread.
No, Dad, open the jelly.
Well, it doesn't say to do that. Put the breads together on top of each other. Take a big bite. This doesn't taste like a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Fail.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I had to make it extremely specific.
Oh, good. I'm starving. Take 2 pieces of white bread out of the bag. Take the lid off the jar of peanut butter. Get a butter knife and stick it inside of the peanut butter jar. With the knife, scoop a bit of peanut butter out.
A bit? That means like a lot.
A bit means a lot?
In my world.
All right. There we go.
Doing better than before, though.
Open the jelly jar. Squeeze it onto the other piece of bread.
No.
Done. Closer. Get 2 pieces of bread. Get some peanut butter. Take the peanut butter knife. Open the peanut butter. Put the knife in the PB. Get some jelly. Open the jelly. Squirt the jelly onto the bread.
You're supposed to.
Take the butter knife with the peanut butter on it. Wipe it all over the piece of bread that's blank. Take the butter knife, rub the jelly all over the piece of bread.
Oh, he's doing better.
It says all over. Put the 2 pieces on top of each other.
This is how I meant.
Take 2 pieces of white bread out of the bag. Take the lid off the jar of peanut butter. Get a butter knife and stick it inside of the peanut butter jar. With the knife, scoop some of the peanut butter out of the inside of the jar. Spread your scoop of peanut butter onto 1 of your pieces of bread with a knife.
No.
Squeeze some jelly onto the other piece of bread. Spread the jelly on the bread with the butter knife. Put your 2 pieces of bread, peanut butter and jelly sides together. Done. Get 2 pieces of bread. Get some peanut butter. Get some jelly. Open the peanut butter. Get a butter knife. Put the butter knife in the peanut butter. Take the butter knife out of the peanut butter.
You did it wrong. No.
Take 1 piece of bread and take the butter knife that has the peanut butter on it and spread it all over the top of the piece of bread.
Dad,
That's the top.
I mean the sides.
Squirt some on another piece of bread. Take the butter knife, rub it all over the top of the piece of bread.
I quit. You're not making any sense. Zari ruined it on purpose. He knows how to make one. I know, Evan. It's the joke. It's the game that we're playing. Oh.
Do you know how to eat a piece of bread? You want to take your sandwich with you?
I edited a bit.
Take 2 pieces of white bread, take the lid off the jar of peanut butter. Get a butter knife and stick it inside the peanut butter jar. With the knife, scoop some of the peanut butter out of the inside of the jar. Spread your scoop of peanut butter onto the face of 1 of your pieces of bread with the knife. Squeeze some jelly onto the other piece of bread. Spread the jelly on the bread with the butter knife. Put your 2 pieces of bread, peanut butter and jelly sides together. Done.
Now eat it.
not the best,
Well, you made it.
but I
so.
think it qualifies. And it's a win.
Woohoo!
And I love how at the end when he goes, "Yeah, not the best," and she's like, "Well, you made it." So, I find this video to be
You're not making.
find this video to be quite hilarious, but also just really important about like how we need to be what we need to consider when breaking a task down. And yeah, in the video, he's being a bit manipulative, let's say, about some of the directions that were being provided to him from his children, right? Like either way, he was going to make a mistake regardless. But some of the things in there where it was like put the knife in the peanut butter and spread the peanut butter over the bread with it still in the jar, like it makes me laugh and it's hilarious. But it could theoretically be that if someone was following that step by step, that might happen. So I really do just like to put it I used to teach that, right? I used to teach undergrads like, hey, this is how I would go around and put them in groups and say, hey, describe to me step by step how you would make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I don't even think I said step by step, like describe how you would make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then we'd go around and share out, and then I would play devil's advocate, right? Just like the dad wasn't here, and then people would get frustrated, and it would be hilarious. Yeah, and some of the thing that I have learned through doing that activity for a very long time with different classes pre this video is that there are a ton of different ways that people make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches too. It's very what to some may appear to be a simple task is variable from home to home and people to people. And also because people would be like, oh, get the bread. And I'd be like, well, where'd you get the bread? And people are like, from the top of the fridge or in the refrigerator or in the microwave. Like, it's just always interesting to see how people make stuff that we take for granted. But the main point, the reason I play the video is A, it's hilarious, but B, is it really shows the importance of a task analysis. And sorry about that. And what a task analysis is the process and product of producing complex behavior and sequence of behaviors to their component elements. And that's exactly what we just saw in the video, taking what is actually a fairly complex task of making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in this instance, and breaking it down into its component parts. And we do this and we use use a task analysis to determine the sequence of behaviors an individual must perform to complete a given task, teach complex behaviors such as physical movements or academic tasks, reinforce small steps toward attainment of the final performance, and give feedback on the details of a complex behavior. Now, clearly in the video, we don't see any teaching going on. It's more of just like a fun little video, but some of what we would do when teaching a skill via task analysis is providing reinforcement at those small steps. So how do you conduct a task analysis? So first off, you need to determine what the terminal objective is. What are the skills or behaviors that need to be taught? And what is the end behavior? If we think back to the video, the terminal objective is to have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You want to set the criterion for mastery. So what is the behavior, condition, and criterion? Specify any prerequisite skills that are needed, right? What skills are in that learner's repertoire at the time? You need to take into account dimensional concerns. So how are we measuring success? So if we think about criterion and dimensions, if a student can make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but it takes them an hour to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, that's not very fluent behavior, right? Like we don't need to take that long to do stuff. So we have to have these, how are we measuring success and what are the conditions for mastery? List all the steps. What are the necessary steps? Are these universal steps? Is the sequence correct? Something I highly suggest, and I think everybody should do this every time they do a task analysis, is regardless of what the task is, you write out the task analysis and then give it to someone you know and say, do this exactly like this. And that will tell you if you have missed a step. And then also do it yourself, and don't fill in any missing spaces. Like if there is a spot where you come to a dead end and you can't continue because you missed the step or something can be misconstrued, then clarify it in the task analysis. And you do all this before providing the task analysis to the actual learner. And it's just a good way to check yourself to make sure your task analysis is complete and has all the necessary steps. And then include needed prompts and materials. So some samples of conducting a task analysis. So here we're going to talk about putting shoes on correct feet. So the terminal objective here, for an example, is Kathy will put both shoes on correct feet within 2 minutes. The criterion, presumed to be 100% accurate 100% of the time because no criterion is stated above. Sometimes 100% accuracy is the thing. We've talked about that before. And it was very explicit here, do this within 2 minutes. Here, what materials we will need is a pair of shoes and Kathy's size and some masking tape. And the masking tape is to signify where this needs to occur around the chair. So you would put a grid around the chair. Prerequisite skills that Kathy can do: grasps the concept of left and right and or center, is able to bend over, is able to grasp and hold, and has good motor skills, coordination. Are there any dimensions of concern? So you want to initiate effort as soon as the shoe is in hand, the latency, and work on it until completion, duration. So those are some of the dimensions of concern that we have to take into consideration. And then list the steps. Now, granted, this isn't the best task analysis, but it shows you an example. Get shoes from the closet, sit on the chair, identify right foot, identify right shoe, and put on floor with toe facing away from body. Put toe of right foot into open part of right shoe, grasp back of right shoe with both hands, pull while pushing foot towards front of shoe, etc., etc. Now there could be more steps, there could be less steps. You'd have to have another set of steps for the left shoe. But again, this is just an example of one possible way to conduct a task analysis. We also want to consider shaping. So we're teaching new behaviors through differential reinforcement of successive approximations to a specified target or terminal behavior, sometimes called successive approximations. And we use this when there's a wide gap between the operant level of functioning and the target behavior. So we're going to shape the behavior to the desired outcome, the desired way of displaying the behavior. There are three basic elements of shaping: successive approximations, differential reinforcement, and shifting criterion. Now, successive approximations are the component parts of a task resulting from the task analysis that we talked about that resemble the terminal behavior along some meaningful dimension. So it's getting closer. It's starting to look like that terminal behavior. But when properly sequenced, leads to exhibition of the terminal behavior the way it needs to be exhibited. The initial and intermediate behaviors that lead to the terminal behavior. It's another way to look at it. So here's an example of successive approximations for in-seat behavior. So if we're thinking about getting an individual to sit down at the table for our discrete trial session, we need to have an individual be able to sit in the seat to be able to do the discrete trial. And one way that this might look, if we look here on the left side, we have our successive approximations. We have our initial behavior, the operant level, all the way down to the terminal behavior. And if we look, we see these successive approximations as we move all the way down to the target goal or terminal behavior. So at first, the initial behavior, the operant level of this in-seat behavior was being within 4 feet of the seat. Like the student didn't want to sit down, they didn't want to go to their seat, within 4 feet of this seat. The learner didn't want to sit. So when the student comes around 4 foot, we provide reinforcement. Then we're going to start shaping. So now, in order to earn reinforcement, the student or learner needs to be within 1 foot of the seat. And then we provide reinforcement for that. Then the individual has to make contact of any kind, physical contact with the seat. They could put their foot on the leg of the chair. They could put their hand on the backrest or on the seat part of it. Whatever it means, just making physical contact, lean against the seat, just making physical contact with the seat. And we provide reinforcement when that happens. Now, this is a process. It's not just, hey, you did that once, I'm going to, and then move quickly through it. This is a learning process, and it takes a lot of trials at each stage. Then we would make it a little bit more difficult to gain reinforcement. Now you have to put some part of your rear end on the seat. Even if it's sit your butt down, stand right back up. That earns reinforcement. Then we, again, shift that criterion to butt on the seat, feet on the floor, appropriately, whatever that means. And provide reinforcement for that, even if it's butt on seat, feet on floor, and then stand back up. And then we go sits appropriately. I'm doing air quotes, you can't see. Sits appropriately for 2 minutes, reinforcement. And then we do that for a while until that's learned. Then up to 5 minutes, up to 8 minutes, and up to 10 minutes. So you can see our terminal goal was for an individual to sit, quote, appropriately in a seat for up to 10 minutes. And we shaped that through successive approximations from being within 4 foot of the seat to actually sitting in the seat for 10 minutes. And again, that takes time. And I mentioned the shifting criterion is the gradual increase of the criterion for reinforcement. So as you saw here in this successive approximations, reinforcement is delivered contingent on these shifting criterions. And again, it takes time at each level to get those solid. Also sometimes called a change in criterion. It's one of the single case designs. Single case research designs is change in criterion, which I think is underutilized, and it's a fantastic design, and I actually love to do it. A good rule of thumb via Kaplan 1995, when we're using a shifting criterion, or when to shift the criterion rather, is when the student can engage in the successive approximations on a variable schedule of reinforcement. So when we're seeing that behavior continue in a variable schedule of reinforcement, rather if it's variable interval or variable ratio, then we can shift that criterion to a more challenging criterion, and we would move back to a continuous reinforcement, and then we would fade through continuous reinforcement to variable schedules and then shift again. So as you can see, it's a process and it takes time. These things do not happen all that quickly if it's a new skill being learned by a learner. Here is another example of the shifting criterion example. Within 5 foot of the seat, reinforce every time continuously. Within 5 foot of the seat, reinforce every other time. Sorry about the arrow being out of place here. Within 5 foot of the seat, reinforce at variable times. Then we shift the criterion. Now we're within 3 foot of the seat, reinforcing every time, again, continuously. So you can see how it cycles back to CRF, and we work our way and make it shaping the behavior to in-seat behavior over time using these schedules of reinforcement. Also, when we think about shaping successive approximations, we think about chaining behaviors. So shaping behavior refers to the reinforcement of successive approximations of a terminal behavior. Chaining behaviors refers to the performance of a series or sequence of behaviors. And we have a couple different types of chaining. There's forward chaining, backward chaining, as well as total task chaining. A behavioral chain is a sequence of stimuli and responses. Each response produces a change in the environment that acts as an SD for the next response. And we know the behavioral principles behind SDs. We're doing behavioral chaining. We reinforce responses when they occur in a sequence, so they form a complex behavior. Chains help strengthen new behavior and weaken maladaptive ones. And there, again, are several different, well, 3 different types: forward chaining, total task, as well as backward chaining. And for the first, example we're going to look at is forward chaining. And when we're doing forward chaining, the steps in the chain are taught forward sequence from first to last. And what I'm going to do is I have to click on this, so hopefully everything works out well. Go to an example of forward chaining when tying a shoe.
The method of forward chaining teaches the initial step of a sequence first, then teaches and links together the first and second steps, then the first 3 steps, and so on until the entire chain is completed. In order to move on to the next step, the learner must first master the previous steps. Chaining is helpful in teaching situations in which there are multiple or complex steps. In this video, I will be teaching the learner how to tie their shoe using forward chaining. The task presented to the learner will be learning how to tie a shoe. Step 1, cross the laces and pull tightly. Step 2, create 1 loop. Step 3, go around the loop almost to the point where you can pull it through. Step 4, pull the lace tightly until it makes a bow. Alright, so today I will be teaching you how to tie your shoe. So, step 1, cross the 2 laces over, tighten, and pull until it's tight. Step 2 is you make 1 bunny ear. Step 3, go around the bunny ear and make a little loop so it can pull through the hole. Step 4, pull through the hole until the shoelace is tied. Alright. Okay. So step 1. And then step 2, step 3, and pull tight for step 4. Step 3, pull tight for step 4. Good. The reinforcer used in this video was the ability to move on to the next step after successfully completing the previous steps. Another reinforcer that could have been used, along with the previous reinforcer, is praise. Forward chaining can be used in many more everyday situations. Some other examples in which forward chaining may be helpful are potty training a child, teaching a child how to say different words, and learning how to make a bed. In this video, the learner was able to successfully complete each step to fully complete the task of tying their shoes.
So one thing about this video, clearly with someone doing this for a project, but I've seen this video a few different times, so I've been using it for a while, and I think it's a good example. But the one thing that's missing is that the learner should still be contacting reinforcement throughout doing all of the steps. At each step, a bit of reinforcement, even if it's just praise, if that's reinforcement for the individual, could be delivered throughout the steps. So that's one thing that I think is missing a little bit in that video, but it does show a good example of forward chaining. There's also total task presentation chaining. It's the simultaneous training of all links in a behavioral chain. You want to use this for short, simple tasks, not long, complex tasks. And it is the most difficult to implement because it's the whole task in one go, and it's not really the easiest to pull off well. There's also backward chaining. It's the terminal response, target response, in the chain that is taught first. The response that preceded is reinforced next until the initial response in the chain is taught. Backward chaining helps make efficient use of positive reinforcement to establish a strong chain. And what I wanted to do is also show a video of an example of backward chaining.
Now let's look at how to perform backward chaining. The definition of backward chaining is linking together behaviors beginning with the last behavior in the chain. Let's go through the procedure with the same example of washing hands in order to see how this type of chaining differs from forward chaining. First, prompt your student to perform all the behaviors in the chain in order, except for the last behavior, and then reinforce your student's independent performance of the last behavior.
Wash hands. Okay, we're going to turn water on, get soap, rub hands, scrub, 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 rub, rub, rub. Excellent. Water off. Great job. Your hands are all clean now. Here's your fruit treat.
In this example, we see the instructor prompting the student to turn on water, get soap, rub hands, rinse hands, and turn off water. The instructor stops before the last behavior, and the student must complete the last behavior of drying hands independently in order to receive reinforcement. Then, reinforce your student's independent performance of the next to last and last behaviors in order.
Wash hands. You're going to turn water on, get soap, rub your hands, rub, 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 scrub, scrub, scrub. Great job! You remembered all by yourself. That's excellent. Here's your fruit treat.
Now you see the instructor prompts the student to turn on water, get soap, rub hands, and rinse hands, but then stops so that the student must complete the last two behaviors of turning off water and drying hands in order to get the reinforcer. Then reinforce your student's independent performance of the last three steps in order and continue in this manner until your student can complete the entire chain independently following the SD. An advantage of using backward chaining is that the reinforcement always falls at the end of the chain, allowing you to use a variety of reinforcers. Now let's look at how to perform backward chaining.
That's just another example of backward chaining. Again, can be used with several different types of behaviors. And I think it's sometimes helpful to see videos about these things rather than just trying to have me describe to you what is going on. So that is content for tonight. Get out a bit early, but we didn't take any breaks today, so that's cool. And a lot of content, and you all have a lot of things to do because we are quickly wrapping up this semester. Here are some of the things that you need to be doing. Respond to a peers Module 5 post on the discussion board. Complete the Module 6 lesson guided notes. Remember to place your Module 6 lecture verifications in the folder. Complete reinforcement punishment assignment and submit it on campus. And then complete the Module 6 weekly quiz. And that's it. There were 3 lecture verifications for tonight.